lot of the time we tend to treat people with disabilities as fragile beings. I think that's a mistake. We're not any more or less fragile than anyone else. Human beings are pretty fragile in our own right, but we're also pretty tough and pretty resilient. The disability part of it isn't going to make us any more fragile.
Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This episode is brought to you in part by Reata Pharmaceuticals. Sean, what's on your mind today?
I'm a little sad this morning. I had to spend a lot of money a couple days ago. A lot of money that I didn't expect to have to spend.
That's always sad.
Right? That's just not fun. Granted, it's a part of life. Right. And it has to do with my car. So that's probably not surprising. My car is only a couple years old. And, I drive a lot around town, but I don't go long distances. I'm not a road trip kind of person. So my tires tend to last for a long time for me. Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of construction on the freeways in my area, I got a nail in one of my tires.
Oh, yeah.
And so I took it in. The air was leaking slowly. So I was able to drive it to the tire shop and drop it off. Did a couple hour wait, so I just went to work, right? Later, they called me, and I found out that the nail in my tire had punctured the sidewall.
Right.
And sidewall stuff isn't repairable, right? You can't plug that. Unfortunately, you're going to need a new tire. So, right away, I'm thinking, okay, a couple $100, 150, whatever it is, no big deal. But then she went on to say, because it's a Subaru and all-wheel drive, you have to replace all four tires.
Oh.
And immediately, I'm like, what? Part of me is like, okay, maybe all-wheel drive. I've never heard of this. I'm clueless. But I'm also thinking, all right, you're a tire shop. Your goal is to get me to buy new tires. So I'm kind of like, I don't know. Let me call you back. So I call Subaru, and I'm like, hey, is that true? Is that a thing?
Right.
And they confirmed it's a thing. Beyond a certain point, there's very little wiggle room where you can probably buy a shaved tire from Subaru. Yeah. But the thing is, the treads have to match within a very small window because of the fact that it's all-wheel drive. All four wheels and tires and mechanisms involved communicate and have to be equal.
You're right.
I didn't know that.
Oh, my gosh.
Did you know that?
I guess that makes sense now that I'm thinking of it, but no, I had never thought of that before.
I never knew that. Never heard of it. That was never a thing. So I got an expensive lesson in all-wheel drive.
Wow, well, I appreciate the education this morning because that's something I didn't know before.
Yeah, and that's very important to me, right? I want to inform my friends and listeners. I'm going to keep everybody up to speed. If you're thinking about, there's lots of pros and cons. All-wheel drive is better in the snow, in the rain. But the con is you need four tires at once.
Yeah. Sean, none of us had to spend however much money to get this knowledge. You're the one who's taking it for the team, so thank you for that.
I'm here to serve.
The following message is brought to you by Reata Pharmaceuticals.
Hey, Kyle, you would say that there's no time like the present, right?
Yeah, of course. And?
Well, now is the time. Be in the now. The moment is now.
Yeah, I would say focusing on the now is pretty important. But what are you getting at?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I just want to let our community know that Skyclarys omavaloxolone 50 milligram capsules is now available.
Of course. The first and only FDA-approved prescription medicine for Friedreich ataxia in patients 16 years and older is now available.
So if you or a loved one has FA, be sure to talk to your doctor to see if Skyclarys is right for you.
Now, dude. The time is now.
And to stay updated on all things Skyclarys, visit Skyclarys.com.
Before taking Skyclarys, tell your healthcare provider about your medical conditions and medicines you take. Skyclarys may cause serious side effects, including an increase in liver enzymes in your blood, increase in a blood protein which tells how well your heart is working, and changes in cholesterol levels. Your doctor will test these levels before and during treatment with Skyclarys. The most common side effects of Skyclarys include increased liver enzymes, headache, nausea, stomach pain, tiredness, diarrhea, and muscle pain. Call your doctor if you have any side effects. For additional information about Skyclarys, please see the full prescribing information and patient product information at www.skyclarys.com. This ad was brought to you by Reata Pharmaceuticals.
For our quote of the week, I chose one on adventure. I just went to this website called Brainy Quote, and I clicked on the word adventure. I came across this quote by Brian Blessed, and I had no idea who this guy was. Apparently, he's an actor, and he's been to Everest 3 times. He attempted to summit it 3 times without supplemental oxygen. He never made it to the summit. He made it up to 28,000 feet without oxygen. And he's also the oldest person to reach the North Pole.
Wow.
So, here's his quote. You can't call it an adventure unless it's tinged with danger. The greatest danger in life, though, is not taking the adventure at all. To have the objective of a life of ease is death. I think we've all got to find our own Everest.
Wow.
And that's by Brian Blessed. And that's the quote of the week. And that quote is a great intro to our guest. He's an adventurer in many aspects of his life. His next goal is to complete the world's toughest bike race, Race Across America, which, as we know, is a nonstop 3,000-mile bike race from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic. Oh, and by the way, he's blind. Here to tell us about it is Dave Wilkinson. Dave, welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
It's fantastic to be here, and I love that quote. It's definitely not an adventure if there's not a little bit of danger involved and some adrenaline and a little bit of fear or abject terror. So I love that quote.
Yeah, I was reading your bio on the Speedy Turtle website, and it reminded me of this quote a lot. You know, I think you talk about a lot of adventure in your bio and how fear is not a factor for you. Talk about that a little bit.
To rephrase a little bit, fear can be a factor, but it's a motivating factor for me. I'm almost afraid of being afraid. It feels like a double negative, but in a lot of ways really isn't. When I've done things in the past, when I got involved in doing things like triathlons and got into Ironman and stuff, there was definitely fear involved. But a lot of the fear would come in about, what if I come up short? It's sort of that terror of not wanting to fail, and the idea of, you know, you envision that finish line from the beginning, or at least I do with any type of training. And you're like, what do you mean you're thinking about I wouldn't be able to hit that finish line? We've got to find a way to do this. I'm afraid not to do it. If you're going to have fear, you may as well channel it and use it for something productive.
So, Dave, with all of that in mind, tell us a little more about yourself in your own words.
A good friend of mine a number of years ago, when he was mad at me, told me that I was a good idea taking a step too far. And I've always really liked that. And so I guess I would open with that. I am a relatively ordinary person. I'm in my mid 50s. You know, when I'm not training, I'm working. I work for Hilton Corporate, so I do digital accessibility work with them. I got into marathons right around the time that I turned 40. I did my first marathon. I was running my first 5K since high school when I was 39. And the guy that I was running it with ended up becoming a dear friend. And we did lots and lots of running together. Asked me between miles 2 and 3 if I'd ever considered doing a marathon. And he'd done 27, 28 of them at this point. And he thought it would be an interesting wrinkle to add guiding someone as part of his whole deal for going through a marathon. And so I'm like, sure, I'll do that, whatever. And that's been sort of the approach, I think, for a lot of the things that I've done in my life, whether personally, professionally, is, you know, when something jumps out of nowhere and you figure this is a road that could be really interesting to go down, you just jump at it and go for it and see where it ends up. Yeah. I'm married. I have a 24-year-old kid who is now a PE coach. When I'm not working, I'm riding a bike at this point or sleeping. That's pretty much my life.
Can you share about your visual impairment? Is it something you were born with, or did that happen at some point later in life?
I have Leber's congenital amaurosis, which is a genetic retinal condition that is rare enough that it had never popped up in my family before. My vision consists of being able to see if a light is on and if a blob is blocking the light, and that's about it. I use Braille as my primary means for reading. I supplement that with speech when I'm on the computer. If I hold up fingers in front of me, I know how many are there because I put them there, and I still can't see them all. So my vision is negligible. It's been virtually the same since birth. I can tell where it has changed a little bit. It hasn't changed enough where it makes any difference on eye charts because it really never registered with anything with eye doctors anyway. It has diminished somewhat as I have gotten older, but it has been extremely slow. And so I don't really notice until one day I'm like, oh, I think I used to be able to see that. I have 3 siblings, all of whom I can see. And the Leber's is carried on recessive genes. So it's just a matter of matching up the right genetics. And then your chances are 1 out of 4 and it happened to be me.
Dave, I think a really powerful thing in the disability community is an example. And you set an incredible example. And I think part of what you do is just, oh my gosh, it's possible to run a marathon and not be able to see or do an Ironman. So how exactly does it work when you're running a marathon and you can't see?
There's several things that are involved there. From the purely physical aspect of it, you're using a tether. I made my tethers out of clothesline that I think I bought at Kmart a million years ago. So it was, real high-end tech. I took a pocket knife and just chopped it off. Jacob, my guide, had read somewhere where there was only supposed to be a maximum of 20 inches between us. So we made sure that we filled in that requirement. Not that anybody was going to be measuring, but it seemed like a place to start. And at that point, when you're doing any event, whether it's a 5K or whether you're skiing with someone or, honest to God, if you're just walking down the street with them, your guide has to believe that you have the ability to do what you've set out to do. And you have to believe that your guide is competent enough to be able to get you through the experience. And that sense of trust can form very quickly. I've run marathons with people that I'd never met until right before the race. And so you form that sense of trust in the first couple or few miles. And the idea being there that, they've obviously proven they can run races. I've proven that I can run races. You're not out to break any speed records, or at least I'm not at this stage of my life. And so you take the first few miles pretty easily and you get used to each other. You get used. It's almost like the beginning of a relationship when you figure out what works for each other. What's the difference between left and hard left and stop and all that kind of good stuff. And it just kind of works. I think people probably, especially from the disabled person's point of view, overthink it too much. And I don't overthink it. I figure that it's going to work itself out, that there'll be a few flubs along the way, but we're not aiming for perfection at the beginning. We'll get there over time. My family made it very clear from moment one that there wasn't anything particularly different about me other than I couldn't see, and that wasn't going to be a barrier in my life, as far as what I wanted to do. There might need to be some creativity involved in figuring out how I was going to do things, but that it wasn't going to stop me. Santa Claus brought a tandem bike when I was 4 years old. When I was growing up, we rode all over the place. I climbed trees, and there was a field behind our house. I grew up in rural Arkansas. We'd play Army and run around the fields or whatever. And my folks both worked. And so it wasn't like there was somebody to stay home and try to babysit Dave and make sure that he didn't do something that was going to get him killed. And that was probably a really good thing. My folks figured that, you're going to get bruises, cuts, a little bit of blood. You're going to figure out what your limitations are like any other kid. And I'm forever grateful to them for just letting me be a kid and letting me figure out the world and how I fit in on my terms.
The foundation like that allows all these things. Maybe if your parents were different people, you wouldn't have done any marathons and you wouldn't be planning to do Race Across America.
Yeah, your background definitely helps. A lot of the time, we tend to treat people with disabilities as fragile beings, and I think that's a mistake. We're not any more or less fragile than anyone else. I mean, human beings are pretty fragile in our own right, but we're also pretty tough and pretty resilient. And the disability part of it isn't going to make us any more fragile. I've survived skiing into trees. I've hit poles when I'm running. We've had some pretty significant wipeouts and crashes over the years.
Yeah.
And that's just what happens. And one of the things that you have to talk about with your guide in the beginning of this is like, look, I'm not expecting perfection. Stuff happens. Mm-hmm. There's a chance we could get hurt. There's a chance that the person in front of us could get hurt. I mean, not to be maudlin about it, but people die doing marathons. It's just life. And you're not out to be sheltered and protected from it. You're looking to your guide to have you in the fray.
Let's talk a little bit about Race Across America, which is your next big adventure. I believe it's in June of 2024. So, like you said, you've been on the bike if you're not sleeping or working. Can you talk about how the idea of Race Across America came to you and into your life?
I was in a nasty car crash in late 2017 where I damaged 4 vertebrae in my neck. I was extraordinarily lucky to have not come away with more significant injuries. I have some issues that have sort of lingered from that, but they're very minor. But I was pretty much unable to do a whole lot for a period of a few months, and it really bored the hell out of me. And it made me cranky that there was a chink in the armor from a car crash of all things. I've done way too many dumb things over the years to almost be brought down by a car crash. And so at that point, I was trying to figure out the most patently absurd thing that I could do to prove that I was back. I met someone in Toronto who was a blind lady who was about my age, who was talking about she had completed an Ironman, and the switch flipped, and it was just like, I could do that. I could do an Ironman.
Yeah.
Not even really sure what the distances involved are. Who cares? I could do that. And I decided sort of on the spot, we're going to do Ironman. And so I spent the next several years, completed three full Ironman competitions, which for folks who don't know is a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and then a full marathon. When we were training for our last Ironman, my guide and I were like, okay, we've done this. Now what? And I'd gone swimming with the lady who had been part of a team who had done Race Across America. And she'd mentioned it one morning as something that she thought would be entertaining for me to do. And it just stuck in my head. And so when I was trying to think of, okay, what's the next really dumb idea that I can come up with? The idea of this race, I just love the idea that you go coast to coast. I like the symbolism of that to start at the Pacific and end up in the Atlantic. I love everything about it. I love the fact that putting your crew together and all the logistics are a horror show. It reminds. I've been telling people that it reminds me of the Taylor Swift tour, except that we're skipping all the fame and adulation. Um, I enjoy the teamwork that's involved in tandem cycling. Where you're working together, where you've got to let each other know, even just little things like I'm about to get a drink because your balance changes on the bike.
Mhm.
You don't want each other to be caught off guard. And it's a fun sport. And as I'm getting older, my knees aren't as happy with running. So I'm totally happy to be cycling for a
Nice.
while.
Yeah. Okay. Dave, you talked about putting your crew together, and the race is, as of right now, I'm 10 months away. On one side, you've got quite a bit of time. On another side, you better start training. Is your entire crew put together, or is that something you're still working on?
My crew is mostly put together. I have a crew chief, which is going to be my younger sister. Jim Trout, my guide, his wife is going to be on our crew. 2 of his sons are going to be on our crew. I am hoping and planning on, but have not approached yet, my son about being on our crew because he's just this even-keeled, nothing phases him kind of guy, and he can fix anything. My wife is planning on going. I think it's one of the things where she's almost afraid not to go, where she just wants to be there and be part of it, and it'll be good. I'll need her support as we're going along because she's a sweetheart. So we're looking at having a crew of about 8 people. We are still tinkering with it, but the basics of the crew are done at this point.
Yeah,
that's gotta feel good.
And Jim's wife and his 2 sons have done this before, which just makes me incredibly happy. Jim and I had agreed to do this as a team before we ever met. By the time we actually got to ride together, at that point, you just had to hope that when we actually finally met, that it was going to be the right chemistry and that something wasn't going to go horribly wrong. And as it turned out, it was fantastic. But he is a seriously awesome rider. He's cycled over like 200,000 miles in his life or something ridiculous like that. He's an insane athlete. He's phenomenal to be able to rely on as far as resources for how to put this together. And so I'm extraordinarily lucky to have found someone who is not only an incredible athlete, but someone who is an organizational wizard and has a lot of these pieces already figured out. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have him as my guide.
What category will you be competing in? Our team was in the 4-man category, and it was kind of relay style across the U.S. You guys are 2 people, but obviously you're both going to be riding every inch. So I'm curious to know what category that goes in.
We are a solo rider. However, we are in a specific tandem category. There have been 16 tandem teams to complete Race Across America, including a team of 4 blind tandem cyclists and their pilots in 2018. We will be the first solo tandem cyclist team with a blind rider to complete this. Any other tandem bike that has done this as a solo project, you've had two visual people on the bike so that they could switch off as far as who was going to be the captain and who was going to be the stoker. So we are in a category of 1. As ludicrous as it sounds, when we cross the finish line, we will have a world record by the sheer fact that no one else will have done it. And I'm both happy about that, and I'm really kind of pissed off about that.
Mm-hmm.
What I hope happens with this, I will have been a success if someone out there comes across this story, sees our time next year, and thinks, those guys were slow, I could smoke that. And they put something together and leave us in the dust.
Or even, I would say, maybe they don't beat your time, but how many people are going to see you or read your story or see a picture online and think like you did, I can do that? And they just start doing something that was never on their mind in the first place.
I was trying to badger my way to Arizona Ironman, and we were sending these emails back and forth. And on their website, they had a person with a disability as part of their advertising and promotional materials. And so I sent them this thing, and it was like, we're right what you're looking for on your website, and your participation rate among people with disabilities is 0.18%. How can you not have us in this race?
Yeah.
And we've got to get that participation rate above 0.18%. It's like they were all excited. There were like 5 people that were going to be competing in the disability category. And you're like, come on.
Yeah, and it's a shame because all three of us know that there are people out there who could do it, but they're afraid or they just don't know they could. And it would be amazing for so many people if more would get involved in sport despite their disability.
I do think we need to bring one thing up here when we talk about other people being able to do this, and that is that financing is a big deal. Triathlons aren't cheap. Race Across America is certainly not cheap. Part of what we are extremely fortunate, meaning the three of us, that we have been able to put together financing to be able to do this stuff. Yeah. And the reason I bring this up is that for folks who are out there who are thinking, I don't have a bike. I don't have the trainer, a trainer in my basement, all this type of stuff. Think much smaller than that. Pelotons are accessible bikes. And so if you've got a gym that has a Peloton, that rascal has an Android tablet and has all of your accessibility features, whether it's talkback for people who are blind or visually impaired. You can think smaller than doing this whole thing, work up to it. None of us started out thinking we're going to tackle the biggest thing humanly possible in the beginning. Sure. Running is a crazy cheap sport. I think, my tethers over the years, I think that was an $8 roll of clothesline that I'm still using. But financing does come in to be a part of some of this stuff. When you're looking at good bikes and good trainers and, we're paying all the expenses of all of our crew, that adds up pretty quick. And I think that is a barrier to a lot of, it's no secret that people with disabilities in general are towards the lower end of income, and that does hurt. And so part of this has got to be to figure out how we get the financial support to get people out there.
Yep.
So Dave, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you guys might face out on the road in Race Across America?
I think the biggest challenge we're going to face is going to be sheer exhaustion. You're riding yourselves into the ground. You're trying to do 280 miles a day, which means that you're getting, maybe 4 hours of sleep a night, and the sheer exhaustion. And I think staying motivated, keeping the crew motivated, not letting things get you down. There are going to be some bad days. There's going to be some crappy weather, and not letting that just overwhelm you, and just keep moving forward. And it's so much easier to say than to do. But that to me is the part that, as someone I worked nights in college, so that I've worked from midnight to 8, and I went to school in the daytime, and I slept whenever I could. I remember how much you can hallucinate and get weird when you don't have enough sleep for days on end. So that's the part that I think is going to be a little scary.
Regarding this huge challenge, in your bio on your website, speedyturtle.net, by the way, you say that you've always had to work harder than people who are sighted, and that has been a motivating factor. And I imagine that that's one of the things that has prepared you to be able to take on a challenge like this. Can you talk about that concept a little bit?
As a blind person, you're always on alert. It almost reminds me of like animals in the wild. I'm always paying attention to what I'm hearing, what I'm smelling, what I'm touching as I'm going through. You don't just sort of glide through the world. You're always thinking about, how do I get from point A to point B? How am I going to fill out this form that's mostly accessible, but you're missing X blank? There are always additional tasks that are involved. And I think that's the case with any disability. And so as a result of that, you end up working harder. You end up putting more time in than someone who is totally able-bodied. And you can look at that two ways. You can be like, oh, that sucks. It's going to take me, I'm having to work harder than anyone else. Well, big deal. That's just the way it is. And on the plus side, you develop one hell of a work ethic out of that. And you can channel that, and you start becoming way more efficient. You can use it to your advantage. And so I guess what I think of here, when I'm doing 8-hour bike rides on a trainer, staying in one place for that many hours, going nowhere, in your basement, is dull. But it's also something that I think I'm better equipped to handle because of having to work really hard to get where I wanted to go over the years.
How do our listeners support Team Speedy Turtle?
A couple of things you can do, and one thing to put it, we are doing a 440-mile qualifier race in October. That's the Natchez Trace, where we start in Nashville, Tennessee, and end up in Natchez, Mississippi. It's 440 miles and then under 48 hours. So that's coming up in October as sort of our opening act for this. But back to your original question, go to our website, get your Speedy Turtle gear, go to our Facebook group, Team Speedy Turtle Races Across America. There's a link to it off of our website. And at some point, I will get millennials to put more good social stuff together. We are going to do some live feeds during our races, both in October and next year. We're going to be using Envision glasses from a company called Envision, and their website is let'senvision.com. And they're smart glasses that have amazing potential for people who are blind or visually impaired. And we're going to be using them for some live streaming events when we're actually on the bike.
We're so grateful that you joined us here. Thank you for your sense of adventure and the example that you set for people with disabilities who are interested in getting into sport and just interested in having an amazing life. We're really looking forward to seeing you've crossed that finish line of Race Across America.
Thank you
very much.
Sean, talking about Race Across America gets me really excited. And I think it probably does you too, just because we've experienced it. We know what it is, and it's so much fun to talk about it and relive a little bit of what it was. And then Dave ratchets up the challenge by planning to do it with another person, and, oh, he can't see anything.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I think it's just an amazing story, and I can't wait to hear his accomplishment when he crosses that finish line.
I can't imagine doing anything on a tandem bike, even if you're both seeing perfectly and physically capable. Like that, I feel like that would drive me nuts. I would get really irritated too easily.
Imagine you and I on a tandem bike.
We just wouldn't do it. We both know better. That would not be good for our marriage or our relationship. But like you said, talking about it, it makes me want to do it again. I'm not going to lie.
When we crossed the finish line, there was that feeling of, oh, I think we could probably do it a little faster next time, you know?
We believe in the power of gratitude and the discipline and exercise of expressing such gratitude. So we end every episode with what we refer to as thank you notes. Kyle, who's your thank you note going out to today?
My thank you note goes out to Race Across America. It's a pretty neat thing that somebody was like, I wonder if we could do a race all the way across the U.S. There's so many reasons to not do that. Yep. But a long time ago, someone said, let's try it. And it's still going today. When we did it, and I think they're still the owners, it's Fred and Rick are the owners, and they're super cool. But just to keep it going, no matter who the owners are, I really appreciate the concept of this race and just making it happen.
Yeah, agreed. Certainly a pretty awesome endeavor. I'm saying thank you to a lot of friends and family. I mentioned it in a previous episode with everything going on with my mom being in the hospital for a couple months. A lot of people stepped in and helped with, I mentioned DoorDash money, right?
Yeah.
Well, another big help has to do with the air travel. A lot of the times my flights were very last minute, which can be expensive. So a handful of friends gave me airline miles or purchased gift cards for Southwest, and that just made a big difference on my finances, right? Because I wasn't working, so I wasn't making the normal income, but also had all this outgoing money. So I'm very grateful for people like Kelly, Courtney, Callan, Saj, and a few others that just made travel a little easier for me over the last few months.
This episode is brought to you in part by Reata Pharmaceuticals. We want to thank Dave for coming on the horn and speaking with us about one of our favorite topics today. Visit our website, twodisableddudes.com, and you can find the show notes for this episode. You can get a link to Dave and Speedy Turtle and support their team in Race Across America. If you like this show, share with a friend and leave a review on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, keep living with urgency. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to donate.
Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.